Oral, the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is a model for the world precisely because Canadians cherish freedom of religion, freedom of speech, individual human rights, and have a profound respect for the rights of minorities. We're a country that knows freedom from fear. We're a country of social harmony that reflects our deepest shared values as Canadians. But now the Prime Minister is planning legislation that puts our Charter of Rights and Freedoms under assault. Why is his government contemplating yet another attack on individual rights for some misguided political gain? Why is he playing, Mr. Speaker, so carelessly with the genius that is our wonderful country?
Honourable the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have no idea what the Leader of the Opposition is referring to. This government has not and would not have plans to introduce legislation that contravenes the Charter of Rights. This government stands for and with the protection of minority rights in all cases, Mr. Speaker, and I wish the Liberal Party would stop fear-mongering and start focusing on issues that are of concern to Canadians rather than this baseless speculation, Mr. Speaker. This government will always stand to protect basic rights.
The Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
So, Mr. Speaker, values like equity and fairness are falling faster than the autumn leaves we see in our country under this new government, Mr. Speaker. Gay and lesbian Canadians are fearful of their future. That's new. Quebecers are told by a government advisor their moral standards are corrupting the rest of Canada. That's new. Our charter is undermined. The program that helped visible minorities fight for their legal rights is history. That's new to all of us, Mr. Speaker. As for women, will the Prime Minister explain to the House why his new government has dropped equality of women from the mandate of Status of Women Canada?
The Honourable the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Again, this is all just ridiculous hyperbole from the Leader of the Opposition. What we have, with respect to the program of the Status of Women, is an extremely effective minister in the Minister of Canadian Heritage, who we are proud of, Mr. Speaker, for her great work. And, you know, she has, amongst other things, added to the mandate of the Status of Women program, supporting the full participation of women in Canada's economic, social, and cultural life. I want to know why the Liberals opposed that inclusion in the mandate of the Status of Women program.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. It was already there, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's actions show that guarantees of justice mean little to this so-called new government. Discrimination against gays and lesbians, the elimination of equality for women. This so-called new government is attacking the Charter, has disregard for the courts, and has abolished the program that helps minorities fight for their rights. Does this Prime Minister decided outright to abandon gays and lesbians, women, francophones outside Quebec, and all visible minorities? Or is he abandoning not only all of that, Mr. Speaker, but the whole idea of what is dear to us, Canada? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I think that in the last election, Canadians expressed themselves very clearly. They're sick and tired of the Liberal Party. They think they have a monopoly on virtue and Canadian values. We Conservatives, like all Canadians, share Canadian values. We will protect Canadian values always, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Westmount, Ville-Marie. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister can try to hide his agenda, but the Minister of Justice and some members of his caucus have betrayed him. They've shown their true colors. When they lose the vote on same-sex marriage, the government intends to put forward a radical bill to legalize discrimination against the gay and lesbian communities. Why does the Prime Minister dare to impose his right-wing moral values on Canadians? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I would suggest to the member opposite that she do a bit of research, because this government, the government that adopted such a bill was the Liberal government of Ontario. The Honourable Member for Westmount, Ville-Marie. Mr. Speaker, in the last election campaign, the Prime Minister managed to muzzle his candidates. Now that his minority government is taking action, we see their true colors, their true right-wing intentions. Intolerance to diversity, reducing the rights of minorities, draft legislation to defend religion. Why did the Prime Minister mislead Canadians in the last election? Why does he want to roll back the rights of citizens of this country? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals talk endlessly about Canadian rights and values. But, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to know, where were the Liberals when Canadians of Chinese origin wanted an apology from this government for the injustice of the head tax? For 13 years, the Liberals hid themselves from Chinese Canadians. But we took action on that file because we're a government that's respectful of Canadian rights. Order. The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Mr. Speaker, while the government is cutting funding to the disadvantaged groups, they're giving Americans hundreds of millions of dollars through an aircraft purchase that was botched. The government is now negotiating with Boeing, which is an American company, to make sure that the sale meets the security requirements of the U.S. government, and this may lead to additional costs of hundreds of millions of dollars. How can the Prime Minister explain this shameless waste of public monies? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Leader of the Bloc for asking the question, but unfortunately he's wrong, Mr. Speaker. He's wrong because the government is acting in an effective and rapid manner in the acquisition of the equipment for our soldiers, for our military, including aircraft, Mr. Speaker. And until we reach an acceptable agreement in terms of industrial spin-offs and regional spin-offs, we will sign no contract for the purchase of military equipment. The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister going to deny the fact that acting hastily, as he said, he failed to verify all of the details and American requirements, and that is going to cost $800 million extra? And at the same time, he's cutting $1 billion from the disadvantaged in Canada. If so, he's acting irresponsibly. Can he deny that information? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. Yes, I can deny it, and I deny it. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, on June 6th, the Prime Minister and Minister of Defence promised, almost with their hands on their hearts, that when a decision would be finalized by the government with respect to the purchase of aircraft and helicopters for the armed forces, there would be economic spin-offs and industrial spin-offs for Canada. How can the Prime Minister and his Defence Minister today justify the impasse in terms of the Boeing contract, other than by the fact that they were had like amateurs, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
I'm unaware of the member's allegation that there's an impasse. There is no impasse whatsoever. Negotiations are ongoing right now with Boeing, and we expect that Boeing will provide the full requirement of benefits, and all the purchases of the future, all the military purchases, will benefit Canadians, not only the military.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, it's straightforward. If you don't bow down to American safety requirements or security requirements, there will be no spin-offs. And since there will be no economic spin-offs, there's no guarantee. It's going to cost hundreds of millions more. Why doesn't the government immediately stop the undertaking and go through a transparent tendering process that's fair and that benefits those who are paying, the taxpayers? The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Speaker, I reject the premise of the member's question. We are going in a transparent process. There will be benefits to Canadians, Canadian industry, and to the military. and this is the equipment that the armed forces needs.
The honourable member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
Mr. Speaker, today there were disturbing new revelations that show the extent to which the FBI investigates Canadian citizens, right here in Canada, largely without the knowledge or permission of Canada's government. The FBI operates its largest foreign operation in Canada, and under the previous Liberal government it opened 2 field offices. Does this Conservative government believe that it's okay to let a foreign agency come across our borders, onto our soil, investigating our citizens without our permission? Are you sanctioning that?
The Honourable the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, our security forces have agreements with our allies, with other nations, in terms of information sharing. And I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, these teams work together back and forth. I can also assure all Canadians that anything done on Canadian soil related to information sharing is done according to and within the guidelines of our laws, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
Well, Mr. Speaker, according to the FBI's own information, due to the high volume of investigations it was conducting on Canadians, it gave clearance to its Buffalo office for routine investigations up to 50 miles within Canadian territory. Wow. That's all the way down into Toronto, Mr. Speaker. And an astonishing 1/3 of those agents came across the border without Canada's permission. Not according to any agreements. They did it illegally. What are we going to do about that, Mr. Speaker? What is this government going to do about it?
The Honourable the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated, our teams of officers from various security agencies work with our allies, and sometimes it's with the U.S. We have teams that are designated going back and forth across the border, and sometimes it's farther than 50 miles or 50 kilometers, whatever the distance the member just mentioned from his high quality, apparently, information that he's receiving from the upper echelons of the FBI. I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that everything that is done on Canadian soil related to security and safety and investigation is done in accordance with our laws.
The Honourable Member for Newmarket, Aurora.
This Conservative minority government does not have a mandate to reduce the freedoms that are already guaranteed to Canadians under the Charter of Rights and that have been confirmed by the courts. Despite the lack of a mandate for this, the Justice Minister continues to cater to a socially conservative base and threatens to eliminate equal marriage. When will the Minister of Justice, not the Parliamentary Secretary, assure the House that he will not introduce legislation that in any way legalizes discrimination?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure you that and the House that I will not introduce any legislation that legalizes discrimination.
The Honourable Member for Newmarket, Aurora.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has made it clear he wants to reopen the debate about equal marriage, a debate that we've already had in this House. More recently, the Justice Minister has indicated he already has a fallback plan for when this attempt fails. When will the Prime Minister stop playing politics with Canadians' equal rights, stop catering to a socially conservative base, and start governing for a majority of Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, during the election, this Prime Minister and this government indicated that there would be a free vote on that issue. There would be a motion on that issue. That motion will be brought forward. Beyond that, anything else is speculation.
Honourable Member for Beaches, East York.
Mr. Speaker, this minority Conservative government is anti-women. It has cut off at the knees all organizations working for women's equality in Canada. The criteria have been changed so that no organization fighting for women's equality will receive funding. The Conservatives have put a tape over women's mouths and shut them up. This is not democracy. When will this minister stop attacking women and give them back their voice?
The Honourable the Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Not backing Martha Hall, is she? I don't think so.
Well, Mr. Speaker, unlike the previous Liberal government who only talked about women's equality and did nothing for a decade, unlike the previous government who received multiple reports and recommendations and did nothing, and who in fact cut funding for the women's program 3 times over the last decade.
Shame.
This new Conservative government will make a difference, a real difference in the lives of Canadian women.
Honourable member for Beaches. Order. The honourable member for Beaches, East York.
Mr. Speaker, this minister believes women should be satisfied with the status quo and to shut up about equality. Last week, this government cut the budget of status of women by almost 40%. This week, they voted against the Liberal motion supporting women's equality. And this morning, the minister failed to explain why equality was removed from the eligibility requirements of the women's program. Will this minister not admit that she has failed Canadian women and that she believes it in them at all? Because this is shameful what she is doing. Absolutely shame.
The Honourable the Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to know what the honourable member opposite has against dealing with trafficking of women and victims of women's trafficking. I'd like to know what the members opposite have against of improving the CPP plan. I'd like to know what the party opposite have against more affordable housing. And I'd like to know what they have against about acting on Aboriginal matrimonial property rights. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, this party does not hold boys' weekends to decide policy.
The honourable member for Verchères-les-Patriotes. The honourable member for Verchères-les-Patriotes. Mr. Speaker, the Quebec City will not be holding the most important women's curling event because the Canadian Curling Federation says that the Quebec language legislation would hinder the event's holding. Imagine the effect of French on curling. Does the minister responsible for sports intend to do something to recognize the fact that curling is played in all languages of the world and that Quebecers are insulted by the behavior of Curling Canada? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Sport. The Government of Canada is committed to promoting both official languages in the Canadian sports system. Sports Canada believes that that sporting organizations like Curling Canada has to respect both official languages of Canada. Thanks to the government's commitment and its partners' commitment, Canadians have access to all services they need in both official languages. The honourable member for Quebec. Mr. Speaker, the minister responsible for the francophonie in the Quebec City area found nothing better to say about Curling Canada's attitude than to invite them to visit Quebec City. But we expect something much more concrete from a minister. What's the minister waiting for before intervening concretely with Curling Canada to vigorously protest its narrow-minded and biased view against not just Quebec City but all of Quebec? What's she waiting for before condemning Curling Canada for its disdain for Quebec? The Honourable Minister for International Cooperation. Mr. Speaker, I in no way invited the Curling Association to visit Quebec City. She's wrong about that. She's making statements that are totally false. What I said about the decision taken by the Canadian Curling Federation was that it was up to them to make the decision, but the International Hockey Association did not find any problem with Bill 101 in Quebec and had no problem respecting it. The Honourable Member for Huntsic. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we were entitled to a new ideological decision from the government. The Minister of Canadian Heritage informed women's groups that her department would no longer be funding rights advocacy. That's a concrete action. How can the minister justify that decision other than by the ideological approach taken by her government, which seeks to hinder women in their struggle for equality by cutting off funding? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage.
As this House has been told, we tried to get value for Canadian dollars and Canadian taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, we believe that rather than lobbying and advocacy, we know what the problems are. We believe that groups that help women in their communities and in their daily lives will show an effect and will result in change, positive change for women.
Here, here.
The Honourable Member for Hochelaga. The government's intention to legalize discrimination against homosexuals, and the Prime Minister said it was just speculation. But on Tuesday, the Minister of Justice spoke openly about his intention to table a bill to that effect. The member for Wildrose told the media yesterday that the minister had indeed undertaken this and that it was timely and appropriate. How can the Prime Minister explain that members of his own caucus and cabinet not only contradict him on that, but they're enthusiastic about such legislation? It's shameful, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to see where, in fact, I confirm that any such legislation was coming forward. In fact, that is speculation on the part of the member and anyone else making that statement.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener-Waterloo.
Mr. Speaker, Joe Taylor, the son of a Second World War Canadian soldier, was born in England in 1945. He and his mother became Canadian citizens when they landed in Halifax in 1946. When the marriage failed, he and his mother returned to England. When Mr. Taylor moved back to Canada several years ago, he was denied citizenship rights because he was born out of wedlock. Does the minister really believe it's justifiable in this day and age to discriminate against children born out of wedlock?
Fix it. The Honourable Minister of Citizenship and Immigration.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have to say that I'm very sympathetic, I think like all parliamentarians, to people who find themselves in situations that the Act did not anticipate. And, Mr. Speaker, we want to sort those out. But, Mr. Speaker, when there is a situation where there is a court decision that has implications for hundreds of statutes, dozens of departments, and could cost tens of billions of dollars, Mr. Speaker, in situations like that, we have a duty to appeal.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener Waterloo.
Duty to the veterans.
Rubbish, Mr. Speaker. On September 1st, Federal Court Justice Martineau ruled sections of the Citizenship Act unconstitutional and ordered this minister to restore Mr. Taylor's citizenship. The minister is appealing the decision. Defending one's charter rights is an expensive process. Mr. Taylor does not have the financial resources to fight the government. Has the government eliminated the court challenges program to deny people like Mr. Taylor their charters right? We, as Liberals, had a court challenges program.
The Honourable Minister of Citizenship and Immigration.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as Liberals, they had 13 years to sort the problem out, and they did absolutely nothing, Mr. Speaker. That's the fact. Mr. Speaker, as I explained to the member, we are trying to find ways to deal with this situation. Last year in the last Parliament, as an opposition party, we paved the way for war brides to become Canadian citizens, Mr. Speaker, as an opposition party. We are working to that end, Mr. Speaker, but we can't stand idle when court decisions threaten dozens of statutes and could cost the government billions of dollars. In a case like that, it is our duty to stand up for the Government of Canada and the people of Canada.
The Honourable Member for Hull Aylmer. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Public Works committed quite a mistake. He was in such a hurry to have his new military gear that with the purchase of the Chinooks and other aircraft for the sum of $9 billion, there was a problem with the country-to-country purchase. And in doing this, his friends in Washington will get about $20 billion in commissions. Does the Minister of Public Works not recognize that he's responsible in this affair, or is he in too much of a hurry to be re-elected in Repentigny? The Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know where the member opposite gets these outrageous numbers. In fact, the number exceeds the total value of all the contracts we've even talked about. This is a ridiculous allegation. We are getting We are getting the aircraft, and we'll be getting the ships and the trucks that the military need. Citizens of Canada will benefit by this. There will be industrial benefits, and we're going to get it at the world price.
The Honourable Member for Hull Aylmer. Mr. Speaker, this government must answer for its actions. What other useful programs will this government have to cut to make up for what was done by the Minister of Public Works? Why is the Minister of Public Works not here to account for what he has done? Will the Prime Minister finally call by-elections in Repentigny? Will the Prime Minister finally give Senator Fortier an opportunity to be elected as quickly as possible so that he can be accountable for his poor management of public funds? The Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Works.
File after file, what we're doing for Canadian taxpayers is what we promised to do in the election campaign. We're getting value for Canadian taxpayers' dollars. That's what Canadians sent us here to do. That's what we're going to do for Canadian taxpayers, is going to get value. And when the next election campaign comes, Canadians will reward a government that keeps its word and gets value. And it won't matter who's leading that party, if it's Bob Recession Ray or the Honourable Academic from Massachusetts.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, Canada had the honour of welcoming the President of Afghanistan. He requested Canada's assistance in helping to eradicate polio from Afghanistan. Can the Minister of International Cooperation please tell us if there are any new initiatives as a result of her discussions with President Karzai?
The Honourable Minister of International Cooperation.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his excellent question. And today I announced a contribution of $5 million for a project to immunize 7 million young Afghan children against polio. These sums will be given to UNICEF and the World Health Fund in the Polio Eradication Initiative, and this will target the provinces of Kandahar and another one, and we have responded to the appeal made by President Karzai when he visited.
Today, former Commander Colonel Mike Capstick cites some of the major problems with the mission in Afghanistan. He cites the blunder of the wrong number of soldiers being sent and warlords and drug criminals in the Afghan government. And most interestingly, Mr. Speaker, humanitarian aid that never arrives. If the government can admit it only spends $1 on aid for every $9 on combat, why can it not admit that aid is not getting through because this is the wrong mission? It's an unbalanced mission.
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, a number of times in this House, the Prime Minister and myself and the Foreign Affairs Minister have confirmed the value of our mission in Afghanistan. We're in Afghanistan because the government of Afghanistan asked us to be there. Because if we're not there and NATO isn't there, the Taliban will return and there will be a murderous regime in Afghanistan, and that's what I don't think the NDP want in Afghanistan.
Honourable Member for New Westminster.
Mr. Speaker, this minister has a reputation for strong and blunt answers. I wish just once, that he would get up in the House and not give all the empty rhetoric. Now that the U.S. Republicans, no less than the Senate Majority Leader, Bill First, are asking for peace talks in Afghanistan, is this minister finally ready to listen? Will this government step up to the plate and help to kickstart peace talks in Afghanistan?
Honourable the Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, we are in Afghanistan as part of NATO. We have certain responsibilities within Afghanistan, particularly the Kandahar province. It is not our function to become the government of Afghanistan. We do not negotiate on part of Afghanistan. It's up to the government to make any arrangements.
The Honourable Member for Ajax Pickering.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Indian Affairs and Indian and Northern Affairs won't answer about the patronage contract for Conservative crony Harvey Andre. Instead, he insults the previous negotiator and steamrolls the truth. The former Premier of Ontario refutes the amounts the minister claims, and he also confirms the so-called work Mr. Andre was hired to do
is already completed. Mr. Peterson said today, all it needs is for the political masters to sign on. My work is all done. Mr. Speaker, why did the minister give Harvey Andre a lucrative contract to do nothing?
The Honourable, the Parliamentary Secretary of the Ministry of Indian Affairs and Northern Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for the question. Mr. Speaker, Dr. Andre clearly is a very well-known Canadian with considerable experience. He's also a former parliamentarian. And above that, Mr. Speaker, in fact, he's working on behalf of the Government of Canada for only $50,000. Mr. Speaker, this is dramatically less than what was paid to the previous negotiator, who unfortunately did not accomplish his task. Mr. Speaker, this amounts to 100% of the value at 5% of the cost.
The Honourable Member for Ajax Pickering.
Mr. Speaker, he's a well-known conservative who was paid to do no work. In the days of Maroney, Harvey Andre used to say that you make more money by knowing Harvey Andre than by being Harvey Andre. This minister is sure trying to turn that around. I guess he feels he owes him one. It was Harvey Andre who got the minister a job with the Indian Claims Commission in 1992. This minister needs to stop ducking and weaving and produce this contract. Let's see it, Mr. Speaker. Let the facts show that he gave a man who owed him big, his campaign co-chair and riding president's father-in-law, a man who got him a job in 92, a lucrative contract to do absolutely
The Honourable, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development. Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Andre, of course, is a very well-known Canadian with a wealth of experience. And in fact, he is working until the end of this year for $50,000. I know this might be hard to believe for the members opposite, as it does seem like a very conservative amount. But in fact, it is the truth, Mr. Speaker. And again, this is something we're very proud of.
The Honourable Member for Algoma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing.
Mr. Speaker, in January, this government inherited the best set of books ever, but has still decided to cut important programs. Many of those cuts affect the most vulnerable in Canada. With a $13 billion surplus, can the minister explain why this government feels the need to pick on our Aboriginal communities by refusing to honour the signed Kelowna Accord and by freezing funding for capital, operations and band elections for Ontario First Nations?
No. The Honourable, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indian.
Mr. Speaker, the Government of Canada does support, of course, band elections, and this amount is something that previously was under a different budget umbrella. Mr. Speaker, now it is being folded into the entire budget for the Ontario region, and this is a move that is seen by the community as important.
The Honourable Member for Algoma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing.
Not very satisfactory, Mr. Speaker. It seems, Mr. Speaker, that this mean-spirited minority Conservative government wants to make Ontario's First Nations pay for the tragic difficulties in the Northern Ontario community of Saskatchewan. Will this government do the right thing and solve the Saskatchewan problem out of the big financial surplus they inherited and not on the backs of Ontario First Nations, which badly need funding for capital, operations and band elections?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clearly, the people of Saskatchewan have faced hardships, considerable hardships. And after we came into government, Mr. Speaker, we took immediate action. Mr. Speaker, since the spring, there's been considerable progress. All the residents have returned to Saskatchewan as of August, and water now meets the Ontario provincial standards.
Wow.
But it should be said, Mr. Speaker, that the previous Liberal government left the people of Saskatchewan without a dime or a plan.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Bruno-Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, union representatives from the Ottawa in favour of the anti-strike-breaker legislation from the Bloc Québécois have been trying for some time to meet with the Minister of Transport, who refuses to see them. Why would the Minister of Transport, who's the member for the Ottawa region, refuse to meet with these workers? Why is he refusing to even hear the recent arguments that these workers want to make in favour of the bill? The Honourable Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, everyone knows that in Canada there are only 2 out of 10 provinces that have anti-strike breaking legislation, Quebec since 1977 and British Columbia since 1993. That said, Mr. Speaker, since this is a shared jurisdiction, why would opposition members from the Bloc want to force other provinces to adopt legislation that they don't want? The Honourable Member for Saint-Bruno, Saint-Hubert. The Minister of Labour, who comes from Quebec, must know that in the absence of anti-strike breaking legislation in the Canada Labour Code, conflicts last almost twice as long as conflicts that are covered by the Quebec Code. Will the Minister not abandon his ideological approach and remember that he comes from Quebec, and as a member from Quebec, he has in the past voted in favor of this bill? Could he take care of the workers instead of taking care of his limousine? The Honourable Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, we also have statistics that show the opposite of what the Honourable Member has put forward. In provinces where there is anti-strike breaking legislation, conflicts last even longer. That said, Mr. Speaker, I would remind you that the Act was voted on in this House. It was reviewed periodically, and members all agreed that the best balance was to have legislation when using replacement workers that wasn't to undermine the representativeness of the unions.
Mr. Speaker, again, I rise about St. John Harbour cleanup. Yesterday, I was pleased to join Premier Sean Graham when he signed an agreement for this project in St. John for $26.6 million. Bravo! The Premier was able to do in one day what the Prime Minister has been unwilling to do in 9 months.
Shame.
If the Liberal Premier of New Brunswick can commit to St. John Harbour cleanup on his first day as Premier, how long, Mr. Speaker, will it take the Prime Minister to live up to his commitment and to fund this crucial project for our community?
Honourable the Minister of Transport. Order.
Well, I'm happy that my honourable colleague, Mr. Speaker, has stood up for this issue. Actually, it's the first time that he stands up for it. This government, Mr. Speaker, has made a joint $8.5 million commitment to the first step to clean up the St. John Harbour, and that was done under a Conservative provincial government.
Honourable Member for Edmonton East.
Mr. Speaker, for years, many provinces called upon the federal government to suspend the application of the Criminal Code section on interest rates for payday loans. This would allow them to regulate the industry to better protect consumers throughout Canada. Can the Justice Minister please let us know when he plans to address this very important issue?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for his excellent question. Indeed, Canada's new government, in contrast to the previous Liberal government, is working cooperatively with our provincial partners. That is why tomorrow we will introduce a bill on payday loans that will address the concerns from these provinces that wish to regulate the industry to better protect consumers. And I look forward to support from all parties in the House on this important bill so that we can work together with the provinces.
Honourable Member for British Columbia, Southern Interior.
Mr. Speaker, the government has clearly stated its intention to cut out the wheat board's legs from under it. Hear, hear. They have appointed a minister who opposes the mandate of the wheat board and has done everything in his power to systematically destroy this Canadian institution. Sham roundtables, closed-door meetings, and whisper campaigns. So, I have a simple question for the Minister of Agriculture. Will he allow, as the law states, the 85,000 farmers who use the wheat board to vote on its future? Yes or no?
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
What we have done, of course, is made steps to follow through on our campaign promise
Campaign promises are something the Liberals aren't used to, but what we said was we were moving to marketing choice. We said we'd appoint a task force to give us some of the details on that marketing choice. But, Mr. Speaker, I always find it a little passing strange when my critic in the NDP or my critic on the Liberals, who don't have to live under the wheat board, tell the rest of Canada how they have to market their products.
The honourable member for British Columbia, Southern Interior.
Remind us of the shameful softwood lumber agreement. I asked a very simple question. Does he intend to allow the 85,000 farmers who use the wheat board a democratic vote? No more talk about choice. The only choice is whether the government is going to follow the law or break the law, extend farmers' rights or deny farmers' rights, support democracy or suffocate it. Which is it, Mr. Speaker? Will farmers get a say, yes or no?
Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
What we've done so far is appoint a task force. That task force is reporting back to me within about 3 or 4 weeks. They're going to give some of the details about what a corporate structure of a voluntary wheat board might look like. Mr. Speaker, we're determined to have a strong but voluntary wheat board in a marketing choice world. But, Mr. Speaker, that's all we've done. There's been no other proposals on the table. There's been discussion. Mr. Speaker, right now there's nothing to even have a plebiscite about.
The honourable member for Winnipeg South Centre. Order, please. Order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the proposed Canadian Museum for Human Rights will be a national landmark for the city of Winnipeg.
Excellent.
A global meeting place for learning, reflection, dialogue, and debate on the issue of human rights. The government, Mr. Speaker, has had this file for months now. Yet the supporters of the museum have heard nothing on whether they will receive sustainable funding.
Of course not.
Will the Prime Minister guarantee that the Canadian Museum for Human Rights will receive its requested operating funds? Or once again, is human rights not a priority for this government?
Not at all.
The Honourable, the Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this government, first of all, understands the difference between a building and rights and human rights. Mr. Speaker, we have been working very diligently with the Asper family, and we understand that the plans are in place. We're reviewing those plans. We have discussed viable options for consideration by the Asper family, and in fact, I will be meeting with representatives of that group later this week.
The honourable member for Northumberland, Quinte West.
Mr. Speaker, just this past Tuesday, North Korea announced its intention to conduct a nuclear test in the future. This announcement has provoked a strong reaction by the international community, as it is a threat to regional peace and stability. What is Canada doing to respond to this threat?
Honourable the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Speaker, North Korea, as we know, has made recent statements and engaged in an intent to conduct a nuclear test in the future. It's seen as very provocative, Mr. Speaker. It undermines regional peace and stability, and it's unacceptable to Canada as it is to the entire international community. Canada has repeatedly urged North Korea to dismantle its nuclear weapons program and refrain from proliferation or risk further international isolation and condemnation. Mr. Speaker, the government remains in close contact with our allies on this issue. We'll raise our objections with North Korea every opportunity we get, and we will again strongly urge North Korea to return to the six-party talks.
Honourable member for Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Treasury Board President was deafening by his silence. We have demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt, both on the written record and on tape, that this minister has dismissed funding to address adult literacy as wasteful and not something the Government of Canada should help with after the fact. The Treasury Board President denied those remarks, but the hard evidence clearly proved otherwise. Will he simply confess that he misspoke himself and reinstate $18 million for those Canadians who need that help with their literacy skills?
The Honourable, the President of the Treasury Board.
With respect to the first point of the comment made by the member for Wascana, I think it's a gross distortion of my comment. But what I said, what the member opposite alleges that I said, that appears in today's Globe and Mail and appeared in Hansard on Friday, in fact, I never did say, and Hansard will back that up. If he's got a tape, I'd certainly welcome him tabling it with this House. If the member's got a copy of the tape, he should table it. I've got the quote from the Globe and Mail that you described, and he'll do that, Mr. Speaker, and we look forward to seeing it.
The honourable member for Saint Maurice Champlain. Mr. Speaker, yesterday in committee, to our great astonishment, the witnesses from Treasury Board Secretariat stated that a minister can, if he wishes to do so, obtain the identity of someone who makes a request for information. Budget cuts from last week have shown that this government has no pity for those who oppose its authority. After the list of reporters, the government now wants a list of those who make access to information requests. Mr. Speaker, we are wondering how far this will go, and we are wondering where and when it will stop. The Honourable President of Treasury Board. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And recent allegations surfaced in the media. I immediately contacted the Privacy Commissioner. I also sent, and my deputy sent, to the Public Service the following note. It is important that all employees, including ministers and exempt staff, are reminded of the rules and regulations surrounding the Access to Information and Privacy Acts. The President of the Treasury Board has asked that the name of an individual who made a request under the Access to Information Act or the Privacy Act is considered personal information and can only be disclosed in accordance with the Privacy Act.
Order. I would like to draw to the attention of honourable members the presence in the gallery of Mr. Ferguson Jenkins, Ambassador of the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame and a pioneering legend of Canadian sport.